Korea, so thank you for recording that. So yeah. Awesome. So
you brought up the sad puppies, rabbit puppies, whatever. It's like, yep, it's time. All right, let's go.
We're going there.
Let's get to the point of this.
That's going to be our opening sequence. All right.
So, I don't know. I don't really notice. Let's just continue that conversation quickly. Like I don't really notice it, to be honest. But I'm not into American politics.
Well,
I noticed
because
that
you're a heathen communist.
Because I noticed that his obscene obsession with guns in the books, but I thought you would like that.
Right. Yes. So I find commonality with many people, infinite diversity and infinite combinations. Let's get that out there, right? Like I'm fine with, I love the guns. I love the detail on the guns. Yes, that's great. But that's where it comes around to a core concept of The Good Place that you have no fucking clue what I'm talking about. So it's hard to connect with you on this. It doesn't have to be about American politics. It's about ethics and morality. You're equating it with Americanism. Why? Because he supports the Second Amendment and you don't have any concept of that. We're talking about the ethics of supporting somebody monetarily who has an opinion you don't agree with. And not just like, he prefers the color blue versus the color red. We're talking about like, free love and who gets to love whoever and gay conversion therapy and whatever else that crazy people might support. That's what we're talking about. It isn't just like, oh, well, he doesn't like a certain breed of dog. Those are opinions. We're talking about like impacting people's way of life and, so forth. So thank you for starting this on that rant. Are we this kind of rant episode? Because I didn't know we were doing a political podcast.
It's the first episode. Yeah. This is just while we
weren't recording. We talk about this kind of stuff.
And then we record in the middle of it because I had 2 minutes on the clock. I just like to point that out. So.
Listen,
it said 11 exactly on my clock. Therefore, I'm going.
Right.
Everyone's interested in what we think when we're not talking about the Dresden Files. So here we are.
Yeah, we're yelling about Larry Correia and rabbit
this time. It's been a little while since we've had that conversation, but Andreas had to poke the bear, and now it's recorded for all time.
We chose to.
So let me ask this because it's been a while since I've read the books, but I've read everything until the latest one, I think.
Okay.
But what politics does I don't know the man that well. I know he likes guns. Okay. But what politics does he have? Do you think might shine through in the books that I'll see if I can remember it? If nothing else, like if I find any commonalities.
Well, this wasn't going to be a research episode, but if we're going to talk about it, like
we can talk about it some other time when we're actually not recording.
This is just going to be you two. I told you.
Right.
I mean, would you prefer them arguing about something you haven't read, or do you want us to start egging you about Star Wars?
No, I'm fine.
I know, right? Because that was the thing I wasn't saying because I wanted.
I know what you were gonna do. The intersectionality between inserting your politics into media is not uncommon to things I hate either.
No, yeah. I mean, that's the thing.
It's very common.
There are often times where they handle it in such a subtle way that you don't know that it's happening, right? So having not read the books, no, I cannot point to you an example where I think that his politics is intersected. I would just have a tough time believing that it hasn't. I mean, you could go with what the Wachowskis have done, right? They didn't just interject some of their ideas and ideals into their media. They made an entire Netflix series about it. So, like, in case you did not get the message that, that they are trans and support trans rights, they had an entire show about it, which is fine. If you like that sort of content, then eat it up. But, you do run into some of these situations where, since we got recorded towards the tail end of my rant, this started out talking about things like Chick-fil-A, which I think Chick-fil-A has gone on to make a public announcement of how they don't do this anymore. But, their founder directly supports like anti-LGBT messaging. So by going to Chick-fil-A, the argument could be made that you are one step removed from putting money into their pocket. So it doesn't, like, I'm not saying do or don't agree with that message, right? I'm not espousing one belief or another. You may get which side of the argument that I'm on, but I'm saying, you can recognize that. And really, these real world examples came from a further conversation we were having before that about the freaking Good Place. So if you've seen The Good Place, it was just a real world example of what they were talking about, that, by supporting this, does that or doesn't it count against you? Like, you've never actually done any harm. You've never said a cross word to an LGBT person for the sake of this argument. But if you support Chick-fil-A, who supports their founder, who supports that anti-message, what's your culpability there? What's your whatever? This is way too serious for what I thought this podcast was going to be. So
this podcast is going to be whatever the fuck we make of it.
Right. So,
but what? Okay, so more spoilers for The Good Place for people if they don't want to hear that. But I don't really care. I might watch it because you're so passionate about it now, actually, and it has one of my favorite actors in it. So, like, I was actually kind of sad I didn't like it because, like, the star is one of the people I enjoy in shows the most. So
Chidi is amazing. So, yeah.
Who?
Really? Okay, continue.
But I was just wondering, like, where do they just ask the questions, or do they try to come with any conclusions on their own in the show?
Yes and no, right? So, like, it's like a philosophy class, because spoiler alert, that's one of the main concepts, is that, you know, they address it in the first 2 episodes. So if you haven't caught on to that, then you weren't paying attention. But it's done like a philosophy class. They don't necessarily tell you what the right answer is. They do address, there is actual tractable action taken during the show, right? They do move the ball down the court, but they don't necessarily say who has the right and wrong answer. You know, you don't, despite the subjects at hand and everything, you don't necessarily run into Big G, you know, for the Dresden fans, the white god anywhere. You don't run into anybody that specific, but you are dealing with demons and angels. And, you know, for the most part, it's a humorous and just whatever, but every couple of episodes, they deal with an actual philosophical problem. And if you're not familiar with the background, then you may miss it. And it's just a humorous episode. But, you know, since they have an episode called The Trolley Problem, that's why I brought it up when we did that for the Dresden Files podcast, when they have, you know, it's not one episode. It's like kind of the overarching idea of the first 3-ish seasons, roughly, which is, you know, the whole idea is predicated on you get points for doing good deeds and you get negative points for doing bad deeds. But some of the good deeds you think you're doing get negative points because of secondary effects or tertiary effects. In a much later episode, again, spoilers, they basically come across the guy who is the poster child for the goody two shoes. That guy doesn't get to go to the actual good place because even still, somehow, even the fact that he's a hermit, he grows his own food, he donates most of that food to charity and all of this other stuff, he still does not have enough points to get into the good place. And then, you know, the show progresses from there. You might be able to suss it out, but, you know, like that's kind of the idea, is that regardless of how good you were, it wasn't ever enough under the system in the show. So that becomes fuel for the next couple of seasons after that. You know, so they do kind of address some of those topics, but, you know, like it was the philosophical stuff. Like, another show that, you know, floored me in the moment that I didn't expect it to, and you can say what you want, I'll put on the Joker makeup later, but Rick and Morty was the same way. Like, Rick and Morty, you just get in it and you're like, what the fuck, this guy is crass and he's burping and he's terrible, but he's a genius.
And then they kind of show you the consequences of your actions, of like, you can't just think that it's as simple as that's done.
Right.
I don't know.
Between that and there was an episode that straight up, I was like, I have feels. Why do I have feels? This is not the show that I would expect to get feels out of.
Wait, which one was that?
It was fairly early on. I can't remember exactly, but I mean, tell me that Mr. Poopy Butthole, as stupid as that episode is for a lot of other reasons, tell me that at the end.
Oh, it was probably Unity.
Like
the ending of the Unity episode.
Maybe.
Yeah, that one was good.
I need to rewatch season 1, so I can't point to the specific episode. But it was
like the one where they have a lot of fantasy friends. That's where the first time
you see him,
because that's Mr. Poopy Butthole. But it was like the 3rd episode, I want to say, but I can't remember enough about what the 3rd episode is. Just in my mind, it was fairly early on, and I'm like, wait a minute, like, why do I feel things right now? So Can we get this to not be about me somehow?
Okay. That was a good start off though, because I was more worried everyone's gonna be like, "What are we doing?" And then I have to I don't know.
Now that we've already shoved my politics in your face, can we introduce each other in case you don't know us from our other stuff? No? Okay.
I don't know how much introduction is necessary, because if you're interested in watching this one, you already know who we are, probably.
But not necessarily. So.
Yeah. Hi, Colin. Introduce yourself. You're the weirder one.
I'm from the High Fantasy Podcast, when that exists.
Yeah, the beta reader buddy, pretty much.
Yeah, and the occasional Dresden Files guest star.
And newly COVID-infected evil masterman.
Yeah.
So.
The actual Colin's over in the closet there, but he can't talk right now.
This is funny for the people who are watching the video because he has a beard. Just subtext.
Good job. Good job for.
And my hair is actually slightly longer than normal.
Yes, that's true.
Ooh,
Couldn't tell.
That's the real tell, yeah. So there's an old adage that every person in the world has a twin, and I ascribe to that very deeply. And I told people if they ever see another one of me running around, they need to keep him there because he's the evil one. Notice the goatee. So yeah. Director. I mean,
yeah, I don't know. I have no rules.
All the evil twins, then?
Maybe.
Was he an evil twin or an evil clone?
Ooh, that's a good point.
Because we all have beards right now.
Hey.
Don't worry,
all
Director.
of us speak exactly.
You can't say that to a lady.
Director, yours is coming in nicely. Don't worry.
The HD on this is very nice. So
terrifying. So I didn't want to have any restrictions, and we'll just figure out what we are going. We'll just go with it, and we'll figure out what the hell we're gonna do after several episodes, and we'll have a rhythm. And probably it's going to continue with ranting, and probably going to swear a whole bunch, and we're going to spoil anything that we care about. So it's
this is just
half the show is going to be about Star Wars because
this is just going to devolve into Shattered.
Probably, I mean, in a way,
possibly.
Yeah. So.
I hold the right to change the title or the anything as much as I fucking want to.
Well, I'm out.
Because I gave you 30 titles you wanted doesn't mean we just cycle through all of them.
Maybe. I mean, if
only
after
27 of them are going to get a
our
suit.
fledgling fan base is confused enough, probably.
If in 3 minutes you give me a title that's that's awesome, and in 5 episodes that really fit, I reserve the right to just change everything.
I really like this name though. I think it fits really well.
Yeah, it took us a while. Honestly, the hardest part of planning this was the title, because everything else we'll talk about whatever random bullshit.
Yeah, it's just we're just going to continue having the fun conversations. I've been wanting to do something like this since the beginning of the year, but I couldn't figure out how to thematically throw it together until I had the idea of, let's call it Stay a While and Listen. And then I shared that idea and we realized how much we would get sued.
Right.
And
maybe
so
then, not worth it sued.
But we can say the words.
We can say the words. We're just not going to
we just monetize have to add PM at the end of it.
Right.
And then give any money we ever make for the rest of our lives to Blizzard. But so that then came in a full month of just what can we call it? What can we call it? What can we do?
Oh man, there were some stinkers.
There were some fun ones though.
Mostly yours.
I mean, maybe, but I only put in a couple.
And they were all terrible.
Yeah.
Go figure.
Wow.
Right.
So
I'm big enough. I can take it.
I know. I believe in you.
Right. And it's so much easier to push your buttons. You don't have a lot of them, but holy cow, are they big and red and say "push me" often?
They're quite fun to watch.
Well, a couple of them are already not pushable because we're not talking about Dresden Files. So that eliminates 3 right there.
I think Butters was
the
best
Dresden
character.
We can't focus on that 1 minute.
Yeah.
So.
Are we doing introductions?
No, we're not.
We were, and then we introduced Colin, and that was all it was.
Yeah. And then the director is like, "Fuck you! There's nothing we're gonna talk about, but we're gonna swear and spoil shit."
Yeah. This is the Colin show.
Oh dear God!
The only one introduced.
Andreas is the disembodied voice from Over the Pond.
So. Yeah, there'll be a camera back one of these days.
You may recognize him. He was the guy with the hair, and sometimes without hair. So yeah,
I have been known to have hair and not hair on occasion. And the funny thing is, I go from really long hair to really short hair, and sometimes it's like a week apart. So I mean, I don't know how I do that.
How does that work?
You got a haircut.
My favorite part of having a faceless Andreas right now is that you can just imagine your favorite version of Andreas, and that's who he is right now. He could have hair or not hair, whichever you pick. So
just go through all the old Dresden episodes, find one you like, and be like, "That's the one." The one with the one with a lot of mess in the background. That's the one I like.
You're gonna be really upset when someone picks an episode where Ben was on and you weren't, and they pick him.
That's
nice.
No.
Ben
you
is
could
my
just
favorite
share
version
screen
of Ben.
or something.
I was gonna make a joke about the Taco Bell box, or like the mess. Like
the Taco Bell box is my favorite version of Andreas, quite honestly.
Right.
Rude.
Good for not being around.
And then this is Jacob. He doesn't like the new Star Wars. That's all you need to know about him.
But we will also sometimes call him EG because we have another Jacob, and that got confusing as fuck over Christmas.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't.
EG is short for Eldest Gruff, if you're not familiar with the Dresden Files, and we love him because, I mean, he's lovable, but also because he's a walking encyclopedia for all things Dresden. So if we slip into that, it's because...
Which we're not talking about, so go figure.
I know, right?
He also hates the best characters in Dresden Files.
Maybe we should do a rating system like it's the F word, right? We're allowed to say it like 3 times an episode, otherwise like that's it.
But then what's the punishment? It has to have really creative punishment.
I mean, we're already not getting money on this episode. We had politics in the first 5 minutes or something, so that's
Fuck it.
Fuck it.
We definitely are rated R this episode. So
yeah, no, it was very easy to make the decision. Like, we are never okay for children.
Right.
Never.
Well, unless you're a really cool parent.
Yeah, if you're a cool parent, we're good for kids. Like they'll grow as human beings.
Exactly. Still, I would say at like 12 and up. You know, like I guess 12 is technically.
You're biased. You actually have kids.
You have kids. You don't get to like we're the judgment on what.
So would you say that I have a professional opinion in this regard? Because
no, I would say you think you have a professional opinion, but you're actually just blinded.
I see. Okay.
What would Amber think?
Well, we sort of try to step away from some of the extreme violence and, like language, but we swear, and boy do I swear. So it's not like this is not my show persona. This is mostly somebody turned on the camera while I was in the shower, and this is what we got. So
so you haven't enrolled
raw and unedited.
You haven't enrolled your oldest in Toddler Fight Club yet? Is what you're telling me?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Are you kidding? That's the best way to get energy out of kids, is to beat them relentlessly. So
well, that's why you had a second one, I assume.
Yes.
They could beat the shit out of each other as time goes on.
Soon.
Eddie's arms are tired. Okay, you gotta have a brother.
The baby still has an orange on a toothpick, so we got to be careful of the neck. Like, we don't want any permanent damage because that's when Child Services gets involved. But
Florida, Child Services got called already.
Yeah. Please, God, understand that these are jokes. I don't need a visit. Nobody needs to come. Find me. Yeah. Ugh. So again, this is not the show about me. So somebody else,
Sorry, you just happen to be the most interesting person at the moment. Yeah.
I'm
so darn interesting
man.
So I mean,
I don't drink
leader. We could talk about him
on the regular, but sometimes I do. So I'm Justin, because now you know my name. The end.
Yeah, no other titles.
Any more information, I'm afraid somebody's going to dox me. So
yeah, we probably have enough of your information somewhere in all of the podcast.
Yeah,
if they go through all of it, they'll probably figure it out.
Shut up, Jesus!
Stop giving them ideas.
I know, right?
Go to episode.
And if you can't figure it out, you can always PM me.
Yeah.
Oh,
this is like talking to Chauncey. We're not making references. Never mind. So
you can make whatever references
all right.
you want.
I'm going to steer the ship in a direction that it was going to be inevitable anyway, and it's going to be
like Star Wars.
Yes. We had joked that it was going to be our first episode, but I've got a way to make the conversation constructive.
Okay.
So for those of you who haven't been watching us for the eons, which one of you guys liked the new Star Wars? This is not for target practice later, But did anybody particularly like one of the 3 movies or all of the 3 movies? Did you think they were not bad for you? The hosts, obviously.
I'll start. I thought they were average blockbuster movies that I found inoffensive, but weren't great.
Okay.
I gave up after The Force Awakens because I did not pay to watch A New Hope, but shittier.
I respect what they tried to do in the second one, but I found it a little confusing because it didn't follow the setup of the first one.
Right. That's
the first one. Force Awakens was a boring retread of A New Hope, but there was enough there to potentially make an interesting trilogy out of.
Right.
And then they just murdered what little parts was left with The Last Jedi.
Because you've got to kill it if you have to kill your.
I feel like the first one was the best one because it just followed tropes and it was fine, and it was like it was like you say, A New Hope.
It still kind of started destroying what was.
Well, I mean, come on.
Yeah, but it was still the same.
New Hope,
still the same storytelling, right?
We have a Death Star, but it's
a Death Planet.
Yay!
Yeah.
We're gonna blow up a planet, but it's gonna be 6 of them.
And I think I spent a high fantasy episode ranting about Starkiller Base.
Yeah. So
has everyone seen the SNL skit for Undercover Boss Starkiller Base?
Yes.
No,
it's hilarious.
It's really funny.
I'm gonna have to.
It's the best thing that came out of that movie, basically. Sadly.
Jacob, you've been kind of silent.
We all know what his opinion is. So
look, saying The Force Awakens is the best of all of them is a misnomer because they are all terrible. And the reason Force Awakens gets away with it is because it leans on the nostalgia and it leans on the easy excuse of, well, it's just A New Hope, but shittier. But it's worse than A New Hope. It destroys the world building. I mean, you have these people, the Empire's back in, 25 years, no explanation.
Mm-hmm.
They turn Han Solo shitty and they kill him.
Not the Empire.
They turn Han Solo shitty and then they kill him. They poop out these characters and give them very little development. And even the basic stuff is just they punt it aside. They absolutely annihilate any chance later on, obviously, and that's the other thing. It tricks people into thinking that you could have built something on it. And you could have built something on it, but what it wrecks along the way is substantial.
Right. Well, and I mean, it introduces a whole bunch of new information that's like, man, it's super convenient. We didn't know this 30 years ago. The memes that have come out of it, like, the first one where I lost my shit was about 5 minutes into the movie when he grabs a blaster bolt out of the air. And you're going to tell me that during Order 66, that the cream of the crop Jedi masters of all time didn't have the inkling that was even possible, that they're just going to get blasted and whatever. And it was like, dude, if he could do that and he's a fucking kid, like, imagine what Mace Windu could have done. Like, are you shitting me?
Yoda.
Yeah, exactly. Like, stuff like that. And then it gets worse with the whole, like, I already shared this meme.
Well, it caught the Force lightning and shot it back.
Yes. Yoda.
Mace Windu got cut in.
But there was effort there. He didn't just be like, beep, pause button. Like, I get it.
Didn't Vader do it in Empire Strikes Back?
Oh, it hit his hand.
No,
it dissipated, but it hit him.
And there's arguments on whether it was force or armor and so forth, because from the legends now, because it's not the expanded universe, you find out that his armor is made of cortosis, which has some anti-energy properties, so. Yeah.
Some things you should not explain.
No, you don't need to. See, certain things you don't need to. Vader catching it is perfectly fine. He's the main villain up until that point. He's completely outclassed any other Force seen other than Yoda. And so him having that power, fine. But even then, like,
should not be better than that.
So and so I get what they were going for with Kylo in that initial thing. They want to make him as intimidating right off the bat. They want to show him in a different way that he means business. Like, okay, fine. Honestly, the first 3 minutes of that movie are the best bits of Kylo you get, and then after that, it's fucking all downhill.
I would agree with the first 3 minutes, probably the best bits of Kylo Ren. I will give you that.
I understand the aspect about the whole not catching a laser bolt out of thin air. Part of that particular aspect, I think, is the same thing the prequels have. It's like you get these flashier, faster lightsaber fights, and you're like, well, why couldn't they do that then? And it's like, well, they were hampered by the technology of their time. So now, you know, and of course you have JJ's mindset of doing new, different, bigger, blah blah blah.
It wasn't. I mean, technology had a lot to do with the original trilogy, but George Lucas also made the conscious decision to make them like he wanted the fights to be more epic. So you had to have both hands on the hilt, and you had these, you know, almost like shadow boxing types of duels, right? Whereas, you know, after about 20 years, when he revisits the thing and he's like, okay, how do I show these people that back in the prime of Jedi, that these guys, like, there's a skill set that's been lost.
That's the kind of thing you can get away with a prequel.
Yeah.
After rewatching the first 6 in the past 2 weeks, I've realized Obi-Wan really sucks at dueling.
Hello there.
The whole like peace sign and then flailing his lightsaber around. That's not.
But every single fight with Dooku, it's like 2 seconds in, and he just gets thrown into the wall and falls over.
Yes.
Yeah.
He really only makes a very good showing in the final fight against Anakin.
Yeah.
He gets warped a lot. Well, I mean, he does okay with Grievous, but you know.
So he goes okay in Grievous, doesn't he? And there's also
he kind of gets his ass kicked.
the
but-
cartoon is canon, right?
Yeah, I mean, Clone Wars is
which one we're
somewhat.
talking about.
I've not watched it, but I bet there's some cool fights in that.
Well, sure, but even that, you've got some weird things. Like you got Mace Windu's speed running around and punching robots with his super force like punches. You know, the cartoons are not immune from nonsense, but they're cartoons. So, you know,
Animation tends to
that
lead
gets
to not very realistic.
right.
I don't. It sounds like, in a way, they needed to really remember and respect the restrictions of the stories that had already been done. If you want them to be connected, then you need to not shit on them.
So where my point was kind of going, right, and just move this into a constructive thing is like it's one of the things that I started to put together a little bit more with Deadpool. Okay, so to go way fucking left field, and I'm going to bring it back to where this makes sense, right? The problem I have with a lot of modern movies that are just okay, even though they should be total fan service, right? It should have been a slam dunk for you to make a brand new Star Wars movie after 20 years, when the ones before that were almost 30 years or whatever, right? 20-ish plus is there as well. Is that they're just bad storytelling. And that's kind of what my beef has been with Abrams anyway, right? I don't know how much creative control Abrams has directly of the story, but I get the impression that it's a lot. But either way, he's over a lot of movies that have shit storytelling one way or another. Either he likes to hire writers that don't write a cohesive story, or he likes to meddle in it. Because like one of the things for him that somebody told me that resonated with me was the fact that Abrams doesn't do story, he does scenes. He's really good if you take your scenes out of context and you film them individually. But once you stitch that shit together, you have lost. You have this whole thing where it's like, what the fuck are we even watching after 5 years? And where was this ever going? And this is a mystery show that had no mystery. There was just, the only mystery is we have no fucking idea what's going on.
Still can't believe people excuse Lost and they're like fine with what happened to like.
So I'm sorry we lost the 5 of you that still think that's the greatest show ever, but but it's stuff like that, right? And so where Deadpool becomes relevant is, wouldn't you know it, that if you gave the fans exactly what they wanted with a semi-cohesive story, you could knock that thing out of the freaking park. Deadpool had everything set against it. It's clearly rated R, if not even worse. It's lucky it got away with a rated R rating. It's a hero that only, diehard comic book fans are going to know anything remotely important about. And it's fucking coming out in the middle of February. And it's not a rom-com. Like, what the hell are you thinking? Oh, what we're thinking is that we have the formula. We took a compelling character, whether you know about him or not. We gave him a compelling story. We didn't shit on the source material. And while we didn't just deliver it straight from the pages of the comics, we hit the story beats. He breaks the fourth wall. He makes the references and all of those things, right? Like, and because it's Deadpool, if you know anything about him, he breaks the fourth wall in the comics, right? And even if it's not, it's done in not a fan servicey way. It's done because it's funny, So when he riffs on Green Lantern, multiple times. You know
Yes.
what's going on because if you watch these kinds of movies, you've seen Green Lantern, you probably cracked that joke, and now he's doing it too, because they understand what the fans are actually after. Whereas like Star Wars, the new ones especially, it seemed like they were trying to do a fan servicey way, but the story isn't really coherent. They're hitting the beats per se, but they didn't really tie them together in any way that makes any kind of sense. Just for some reason, now we're on Star Killer Base. For some reason, we have the Hoth ground team, even though it's not Hoth. They're going to go plant bombs for some reason. We're going to have the fighters who for some reason can't do the exact same thing that Han Solo did, you know, because he's Han Solo. And so we've got to do this multiple ground and air assault and whatever, because that's in every movie. And like, you kind of see where I'm getting at. Where this starts to resemble an actual point, and where like I had some new material for it yesterday, is that so this is that whole quasi we're still controlling the kids media content, but not so much. We started in on the Curse of the Black Pearl, okay, and that movie was a standalone movie at the time, like Iron Man was a standalone movie at the time. And they make references in that movie to the movies that they hadn't even thought of making a sequel to yet. That's what a story looks like. They talk about the origin of Will Turner and how his dad is Bootstrap and he's a pirate. And this shit all fucking pays off in later episodes, right?
Yeah, I mean, they just use what they set up and build on it later. Which is great.
Pirates of the Caribbean is a better genre story than the new Star Wars. That was my epiphany. I'm like, are you kidding me? The fucking Pirates movie that barely anybody knew anything about, that had Johnny Depp being funny and pretend drunk, but really there's like more depth there too.
I thought you were about to say pretend drunk, but actually just really drunk.
The original Pirates had even less cause to be any good than Deadpool did, because at least Deadpool had fans behind it ever since that shitty adaptation in the Wolverine movie. People have been clamoring for that. Nobody fucking planned for this movie. Nobody cared. Everybody was laughing at it.
It was a ride in
and
Disney.
Then it turned into
yes, right, right, and yeah, it turned into. I mean, what, we're up to 5 movies now, and no. I'm not going to say they're universally great, and I'm not going to say that, you know, like there aren't bad beats in them, right? But I'm sitting here watching it, and when they're going on about his dad that you don't meet until what, the 3rd movie or whatever, and you're like, did they just like tie in shit that didn't even exist at the time, which is something that Star Wars couldn't do because they didn't have a cohesive vision. Because we had J.J. Abrams, we said, go run. And then we brought in Rian Johnson because J.J. Abrams wanted to make a different movie than Star Wars, for F's sake. And nobody at any point in time was sitting on top of it like Feige or like anybody else and saying, no, this is the vision.
This is mind-boggling. They didn't have a Marvel-esque plan for the trilogy where like they have someone on the top saying, okay, this is kind of where we want to go.
But you don't understand, Andreas. Star Wars doesn't have the depth of information and all of the stories to pull on like Marvel does. Okay, there aren't decades worth of comics and stories that we could possibly.
We had no source material to draw from.
I told you, your buttons are so big and they're so easy to push. I'm sorry.
It's how do they make that oversight? Like, what happened?
Well, that's when you put somebody in charge who has just been a hanger-on all their lives, and people are like, yeah, well, she's been part of all these great movies. She hasn't fucking done anything on them.
Yeah.
She's the lowest rung of what you would call a producer. She was just there. She was on
she's
set.
The reason why Empire Strikes Back is the movie that it is.
Oh, shut up.
No, I mean, that's because unless I'm conflating people, like that's what I've heard in the past. And so it's like somebody you'd think, right? But at the same time, like, how can you tell me there's not all this source material when, like, within the last 5 years, Disney came out and said it's no longer the expanded universe. It is now Legends. Don't buy that shit because it's irrelevant. Don't hold it against the movies because we're not going to do that. We're going to reinvent the wheel. We're going to bring some of those characters in because isn't that great fan service to just rewrite those stories? But, like, the thing that makes me mad about it isn't that I enjoyed the Legends and expanded universe so much. It's that the Legends and the expanded universe are what held the fucking fandom together for 30 years. Because when George Lucas wasn't making episodes 7, 8, and 9, like he started talking about all the way back in the 80s, it was fucking Timothy Zahn and Michael Stackpole and all the other authors that I can't think of everybody's individual name. And like all of those guys, they wrote the Rogue Squadron books. They wrote the Empire. They wrote, just all of it. But it's cool. We're gonna bring Admiral Thrawn in, so don't hate us.
So
I'm not that big a Star Wars fan, but how good is the Legends universe? Like objectively, like how good is the storytelling?
It's like everything, it's hit or miss.
Yeah.
It's got
there's some
really good
fantastic, there's some
trilogies in
shitty.
it. Got
There are
really
dozens of books by dozens of authors, so yeah, you can't say it. I hate the Yuzong Fong story and concept.
It's like Forgotten Realms-ish, I guess.
Kind of.
It's just like a
Yeah,
lot of
sure.
authors and stuff.
Well, I mean, for the amount of authors and the amount of time it encompasses, because it encompasses about, give or take, 40 years since Battle of Yavin. So there's a long time it takes place over. There's a lot of story beats. There's a lot of new characters. There's a lot of authors. For the amount of content it is, that it is as good as it is in and of itself basically a miracle. There are plenty of beats that are like, The
fact that
Bong goes on for a while, probably longer than it should have, and there's bad books in it, and that takes up a main chunk. But
And
the fact that there's so many different characters that seem to hold to a vision of these characters, well written by so many different authors, is
right.
well, that's
Like,
the other
there's some
thing. I mean,
beloved characters
it's amazing. They wrote these characters. They kept Luke and Leia and Han. They evolved them. They gave them kids. They gave them families. They gave them new trials to go through. They gave them, and nobody shat on their characters. Nobody turned them into cowardly hermits who wanted to die. Nobody turned them into deadbeat parents who Han turned into a deadbeat for a hot minute, but that's because he thought he blamed his son for killing Chewbacca. That's a different issue. But that was
where they lost.
That was a
the Yuzong Fong.
temporary thing.
Yeah.
So Kylo was never in Legends, right?
no.
No.
The fact
There
that they
were-
named him Ben pisses me off so
Well, that's
much.
the other thing.
Right.
Luke, in the Legends, Luke names his kid Ben because why wouldn't he?
Right.
Ben was his mentor.
Right.
In the books, Leia and Han, they have 3 kids. They have a set of twins, and then they have Anakin.
Oh, it was Anakin was the youngest. Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's been too long since I've read some of it, but yeah.
One of their kids, I don't remember if it's Leia and Han or if it's Luke, but one of them is in Legends is supposed to be the actual chosen one, right?
It kind of.
Okay. So the way it works is their kids, they have 2 kids. They have the twins. They have Jason and Jaina, and then they have the youngest Anakin. Eventually, Anakin dies during the main war we were just talking about. And
Which are pretty
Jason
badass.
eventually falls to the dark side. He becomes, for lack of a better term, the Kylo. He turns to the dark side. His kid is the one that becomes like a new version, not of the chosen one, but as like the one who's going to usher in a very stable period of peace after all this time that they've now gone through successive like wars and conflict.
Okay. Is it Jason that then goes and this is just from reading on Wikipedia sometime back. It's like goes dark, then goes gray, Revan style or something?
No, he goes dark, and he redeems himself at the very, very end, like a lot of these Darksiders tend to do, like Anakin does. But he goes dark. He goes full on like
It's so easy to go dark when all your visions tell you one thing, because that's a great way to force a character to become evil.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. I mean, it's always, you're misinterpreting, or you're reading into one side of a forced vision, or you have this fear and it corrupts you.
The
and
Jedi never have that problem. Bring
Right.
balance to the Force. There are hundreds of Jedi, and well, where do you think the balance is going to go? Like,
Oh yeah, but that's the
I'm
other
sorry,
thing.
I'm not as wise as Master Yoda, but goddamn,
You know what else?
Remember when
this
he
doesn't
believed
happen?
in pacifism?
they don't just what?
The Empire doesn't just go away. They have to deal with fighting the remnants of the Empire, and the Empire stick around. They control a section of space even through
Yeah.
to the end of what the Legends were.
Right.
Paleon's one of my favorite characters.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, and some of the miners that show up as well, they become something else. But I can't remember specifically the book, but the Tales of blah blah blah, like Tales of blank blank books were some of my favorites because they're just anthologies of short stories. So you've got the Tales of the Mos Eisley Cantina deals with a lot of the bounty hunter and smuggler crowds, and then you've got the Tales of whatever and all of these other ones. And one of those is like the introductory short story, at least for me, of Corran Horn. And so you've got it's a very familiar beat early on because he's from Corellian security, and he doesn't really get down with what the evil empire is doing. And for reasons, he's got an X-wing snub fighter, and he gets to go on these night flights where he's basically like shirking the law and all this other stuff, even though he's sort of an officer of it. Right? Is the gist of the story. And then you go to, you know, like the Rogue Squadron books, and he becomes kind of like a rookie pilot, even though he's one of the more experienced guys. He makes mistakes and all this other shit. And then he becomes like one of the main dudes. You know, the Rogue Squadron books get a little weird, in my opinion. Sometimes they go on these clandestine missions and whatever. And I'm like, these are fighter pilots. I don't want them to also be spies and shit, but whatever. So again, they're not, but they're still compelling characters. And then like Corran Horn is like one of the guys that I think winds up at like the Temple of the Jedi and inexplicably gets force powers and whatever.
Yes,
and so like,
he is force
you
sensitive.
know, so yeah, his entire story isn't without, you know, its missteps and these story beats and whatever, but like his character evolves and he goes from literally freaking nobody over 20 years to being like, you know, kind of a big deal Jedi and one of the main gray Jedi out of the academy. Is that Corran Horn got force powers while he was an adult, which, you know, feeds into some of the world building and why the Jedi don't like training people past like 13. You know, they don't like training people older than adolescents because they're harder to control and they get these crazy ideas and they're more prone to falling, and, you know, they've got ego and some of these other things. Like some of it's dark and you're like, wait a minute, aren't they supposed to be the universal good guys? And that's where like,
Let's just blow up a star. That's perfectly okay.
Right. Well, and kind of like if you take like a step back, like I stopped holding, like you get the idea, like the Jedi are the peacekeepers of the world, right? And so people often think of them like, oh, well, they're enforcing peace and that's a good thing, right? So they're the white-clad paladins of the Star Wars universe. No, they're the lawful neutral guys. They're not good for goodness sake. They're status quo for goodness sake. And so when there's a trade federation embargo on your planet, they didn't show up to break it because your people are starving. They showed up to make sure that it's legal. They showed up to make sure that you weren't invading the place and subjugating it, because that's not a blockade. You know, that's the Jedi you're dealing with. And so
it's an organization, and then there are, of course, individuals. They're not all like that. It's not like, if you know what I mean.
Sure, but I mean, what I'm saying is they're peacekeepers as in what's the law, not as in we're peacekeepers because good for goodness sake. I don't know a different way to say it, you know. So they're judges. They're not, you know, like Batman, right? He's chaotic good in a lot of senses because he's doing good at any cost, right? Like he's going to do the best good that he can with whatever he can, whereas the Jedi won't. Like especially in some of the books, especially in some of the other stuff, they're just like, sorry man, my hands are tied because dude, like the local guy's a dictator, but he's the guy in charge, so that's his call. You know, they're a little bit more prime directive, if you want to mix metaphors and genres there, where like even though it's objectively bad what's happening, they won't interfere because of their code. You know, and so like you get some of those gray areas and some of those things in the expanded universe and in whatever, and then you get like Corran Horn is kind of like chaotic good in the sense that he's like, well, shouldn't the Jedi stand for good? And you see the conflicts there. I think I'm just rambling at this point, but you know, it turns into this whole like, shouldn't the Jedi be a force for good? But that's kind of in a way a path to the dark side, because you know, good can lead to passions. And it's kind of what Anakin's thing was, right? Anakin didn't start out with, you know, the mustache twirling, let's all the younglings. Anakin's change was fairly abrupt for me. Even having recently gone through all of the Clone Wars episodes and getting caught up there, even that transition seems fairly abrupt to me. There's no like okay, you get some big beats, don't get me wrong, you're asleep at the wheel if murdering a bunch of sand people wasn't, you know, on the thing. I can't remember the Tusken Raiders, you know. You're asleep at the wheel if you didn't see that like as a big fucking warning sign. However,
he even
like
says it.
if you look at something else, like the main thing that drives him away from the Order and the main secret he's keeping is his relationship with Padme. So like if there had been, for instance, she had died somehow and the Jedi had been to blame, which at least seems to be what he thinks, then I could understand his abrupt switchover. But his whole like, I don't know, Mace Windu's got a lightsaber at the Emperor's face. Who do I pick? Who do I side with? Like him siding with the Emperor is just like, it didn't sell well enough to me in the movie, right? Because he's doing the dialogue is there. He's like, but wait, we need to bring him in. You know, in this sense, Mace Windu is doing the good thing for the galaxy by trying off the bad guy, and Anakin's trying to do the lawful thing by making sure we take him in. But he's too dangerous to be kept alive, you know. So
they could have just like given Padme a terminal illness or something, and
no,
broken heart. Guys have said,
yeah.
But like if there was a reason for Anakin to even suspect that she wasn't going to make it.
Well, he had visions, right? That was everything. He had visions she was going to die.
Yeah.
They expand on it better in the book. Actually, the Revenge of the Sith book is one of my favorite Star Wars books of all time, and they go into it a little more. There's a process, like the reason Anakin wants to become a master is not the prestige aspect, but because the masters have unlimited access to the archives and the holocrons and even the dark side stuff that they've collected over the years, whereas obviously a normal knight does not.
Right.
You know, there's more pushback that you can see Mace Windu's side and why he feels that way and the friction between the two of them and all that kind of stuff. There's the reason Obi-Wan's lack of presence at that crucial time is important, because obviously if he's there, he can probably talk Anakin down to some degree.
Right. And so, I did like some of the ways they addressed that in the Clone Wars. Like it's I mean, it is officially canon from Disney, but I kind of still separate it out because they're trying to mold it to what's in the movies, right? And much like the new trilogy, if it wasn't on screen, it doesn't really count. You know, like the whole idea of writing a story is that if you have to go into an interview after the fact and say, well, this is really what was going on, then you didn't tell a compelling story, right? You kind of missed the fundamentals.
Like, was there a New Republic?
Process. Well, yeah, like in
Force
the new
Awakens.
ones, but like what
there was, but not anymore. And
Where
they apparently couldn't control the galaxy enough that they allowed a new empire to rise with an even stronger Death Star, and for some reason, we're not able to publicly support a fight against them.
Right.
They had to have a resistance.
We had to have a new resistance because they're fighting sort of against their own republic, but on behalf of, you know. Yeah.
But they'll tell you all now it's explained in the comics and the other books later. You don't need to worry about it. Outside material. Right. Like, I'm sorry, outside material is great supplemental shit, but if I don't see it firsthand, it's the same with the Dresden Files. If it's not in the main books, I mean, the side stories are great, but don't tell me that I need to read the side stories to get to what the main story is going for. That's not what I bought it for.
Right.
Well, and also for, like, you know, your usual kind of like bread and butter nerd, the one that you think of for the last like 50 years of being a nerd, right? Before nerds were cool and all of this new pop culture stuff that we've been doing for the last 20 or 30 years, like there's levels of canonicity, right? Like what happens on screen is what the story is, because that's what made the cut. That's what the film was. You get little extra tidbits for shit that got cut because of time, because they would have otherwise included that in a perfect world. But books and comics and TV shows that spin off of that are typically not considered canon. Disney is trying to make that more official, right? Because like what the expanded universe used to do is like everybody knew that it wasn't per se canon, but Lucas basically had to sign off on it. So it was the next best thing.
Yeah. Like
right?
When Heir of the Empire came out, it was like the first official time that Lucas let the story move forward.
Right. And so there were definitely instances where that happened, you know, and then you've got other stuff like that with other things. It's not just a Star Wars thing. Like Star Trek comes to mind as well. Like the shows are the first most canon thing. The movies are obviously there as well, because imagine they've got a bigger budget. They've got all this other stuff going into it. But you can't come after the fact and say, but look forward to it in the comics, because, you know, to the level of fans that are raising the alarms and crying about it and whatever you want to call it, that are upset about it, that shit's not canon. nor is it really canon that Rian Johnson goes and says, well, this is the story I was trying to tell you. Well, you failed as a storyteller if you
Nobody
get it defended
fucking
in the
cares.
movie, yeah, like it's a bummer. Like, I get it. Like, I read the interview and that did kind of bring the esteem up a little bit of The Last Jedi, right? And when I first saw it, I didn't really see it as this huge contradictory thing of the first movie, more that it was just trying to ignore a lot of it, use the pieces that made sense and then just kind of leave some of the other nostalgia bait behind a little bit. But, that was kind of the thing. It's like, while I appreciate his interviews and they did kind of give me some more appreciation of it, he
thought it was
he failed
boring
as a director if that wasn't in the movie. You can't say, well, the reason why we didn't use the Holdor move 30 years ago is because we didn't think about it is the real answer. But just like how we've got a warp drive, why did we not put that on a missile? Like, let alone a ship.
Forever.
I mean, obviously,
why is that not the main weapon of space fighting is beyond me. Why you don't make hyperdrive missiles? Why you don't have kamikaze droids? You don't have to use people.
Right.
Why is, and then the fucking
it's a once in a lifetime maneuver.
Yeah, no, that patch hole bullshit. Yeah, it was like, how are they going to find a way to screw this up even further? And they managed. They managed.
But they gave the line to a beloved actor, so you have to eat it up, right?
Oh yeah, no, the lines he delivers are just some of the stupidest shit.
Yeah.
What about decloaking scans?
Oh, dude, don't
Yeah,
get me
the
started
decloaking scans. So now we go from, you need this one big thing to do it. But why aren't they doing it at all times? Why are they only doing it this one time? Why do all of a sudden the TIE fighters in the next movie have them? Because I thought it required this big ass generator to do.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that was one of my things. Like, as soon as they said, like, oh, blah blah blah, cloak, and I'm like, a ship that small can't have a cloaking device. Like, wasn't that they put the line in there? Like, I mean, I get it's a throwaway line, but it's canon because it's on screen. Like, that's how that works. So, but yeah.
Who would have thought?
Since we've lost half of our audience, since we're only
Who would have thought a movie about driving
like,
away in space for 2 hours would be as boring as it was?
Oh, right. It's called Star Wars, not Space Drive, but anyway. Yeah,
let's go to
the ultimate point is the story beats, right? Like, I think that's a main difference between a lot of the movies that I liked and a lot of the ones I didn't. This isn't just a Star Wars thing. Mostly I hate Abrams. So like I said, the new Star Trek has a lot of these problems. In the new Star Trek, we've got a new kind of matter that can actually eat black holes. What? Like, Star Trek is supposed to be the harder science version. Like, leave that shit to Star Wars if you want to do it.
The rest of that movie was good though. Like, he already had the story written out, so it's just like, it's fine. It's a story, and it was a good movie.
Now we found Andreas'
Ignored space magic.
Right. If you thought that I ranted about Star Wars, holy, like, I don't
care about Star Trek as much, so I was able to just kind of enjoy it.
No, that's me too. I couldn't care less about Star Trek. However, I accept and appreciate when people tell me it's bad. The one thing I will say that Star Trek gets, the new Trek anyway, the movies get the benefit of that Star Wars does not, is alternate reality. Your old shit is untouched.
Yeah.
Not with Star Wars.
Yeah. Well, it was fun. It's funny though, because if you were following along at the time, I mean, there's a couple of things going on there. They actually refused to acknowledge that for a while. And then, after like a year or two, they finally started calling it the Prime Universe. And that was probably as much as like,
well, they could ignore it all they want, but I mean, it's in the movie. It's okay. We're in an alternate reality. Fucking Spock says it.
Yes, but it doesn't matter to that story, right? Like, like they say it, but it's not like Back to the Future where we're in a pocket universe and then we go back to the original. They basically do that as a way to hand wave away and throw away all the other shit. Other than that one line, there's nothing fundamentally saying like the original is intact. Spock doesn't ever try to get home. Like they don't talk about the temporal mechanics of it or multiple universes or anything. They just say, let's not worry about that right now because it's an alternate universe. And then
his existence would seem to belie and the fact that he still has his memories would seem to indicate that it still happened. It still went on.
Temporal mechanics is weird, especially in Star Trek. So
that's what I'm saying.
They have rules for this?
You so choose, you can wrap yourself in that blanket and make yourself feel comfortable.
They don't have rules for it per se, so much as like they do what's necessary for the writing. Like watching Star Trek watching Star Trek recently as an adult versus when I was as a kid, right? They make you think, okay, they've got this all together. But there's a whole lot, there's like every season of Star Trek practically has some kind of time travel episode, and numerous of those episodes involve one guy sliding into this pocket timeline, and he gets to keep his memories because of tetrion radiation or chronotons or whatever the bullshitium is, as we like to call it when we were doing the Star Trek role play. Because of bullshitium, he gets to keep his memories, and he's the only guy that can fix what's going on. Or, you know, the life progressed on. They did the story at least twice in Voyager. Life progressed on, and then they got to the far future, and just, God damn it, it's been 20 years, and I'm just pissed off about how I went. So they go back in time to fix the timeline, you know, and whatever else. But ultimately, like, I mean, yes, like Star Trek, especially some of the later stuff, which is again why some of the fans didn't like that stuff either. Like, they go into more fantasy-ish kind of elements, but some of the hand waving that they did in, you know, in the 2009 Star Trek were ridiculous. But where he really kind of like went off the rails entirely was Into Darkness. Like, if you really want to get a rant, so like that was funny other anecdote. They brought that up in an interview because I was interviewing for a company at the time, and they were like, hey, you said you're a Star Trek fan and this movie just came out. What'd you think about it? It's like, so I really want this job, so I don't want to talk about this in the interview because I might say some inappropriate things. But let's just say I'm passionate about it and I didn't enjoy the movie. Like,
I mean, I'm not. I like Trek more than Wars, but neither of them is my favorite Star franchise. That goes to Stargate. Stargate is my favorite.
Stargate is good. It's a good, fun adventure, you know, thing.
I liked the movie. I'll leave it at that.
I liked.
Never seen it.
It got more.
Yeah, it was good. It was decent.
So you got to ignore like some of the past season 5 in a way. Like when the Ori show up, they kind of lost me.
That's season 8, and I kind of see it as 9 and 10 or more. Not Stargate SG-1, but Stargate Command, like a new show, because it changes so much.
Well, and some of that was neat, though, too, when they finally got their own Federation and they have their 2 ships that are like, yeah, we just hopped on the warp drive and zoomed over to Andromeda. So, you know.
But yeah, I also think when in terms of the main topic of Star Wars, that the standalone movies that come out in this new generation are better than the main trilogy.
Sort of.
No.
Rogue One was good. I mean, it could have been, I think, a little bit better, but like it was enjoyable.
Rogue One was a good story, a good characters story. I feel like
Solo suffered from the fact that they kept it Star Wars. Like, if
Solo was better than any of the trilogies for sure.
It would have been fine if it was alone, but it's the same thing that they did with that stupid fucking Bourne movie that didn't have Matt Damon in it, is that they spent so much time trying to harken back to the other movies that it's like they're 2 different stories going on. There's this sort of small story of Han Solo, and then there's this completely other person, and that's a completely different story, and that's fine. You don't have to.
I didn't even bother watching Solo, and I know it's terrible based on what I've.
It was okay. It had some really good people in it, but
anytime you tell me that, oh, you're alone, oh, I guess you're solo. We'll call you Solo. No, fuck off.
Yeah, that was dumb. But Paul Bettany was in it, and he's a fun bad guy.
Character evolution, man. That's what people come to the movies to see. So
again, to go back to the EU, they had Han Solo stories before the main timeline that you know him. They have him meeting Chewbacca. They have
a whole fucking family.
They have him in the Imperial, Academy for a little bit. They have these early stories, and you're like, adapt your materials. Right. Oh, we don't have material. Sorry.
Right.
They did lean too much in the fan service for it, and it suffered for it.
Well,
but yes, I stand by that. I thought those movies were actually good.
It ended with him shooting first. How much more fan service can it be?
As far as I understand, they also try to get into the problem of whether or not droids can think and feel, and they try to open that can of worms.
I don't recall that at all.
That was Rogue One, wasn't it?
No, that was Solo, where they had the droids' rights robot.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that one.
Whatever.
She was kind of tropey in a bad way.
It's funny because she was one of the better characters, in my opinion, because she had motivations, and yes, she was quirky and whatever, but she was true to herself, and she was something new.
The villains, they were fine. They were good characters.
It's funny though. It actually kind of never struck me that it was a bad thing, because like I guess R2-D2 and C-3PO, to me, they're just very unique. They're individuals, and they are their own. Like, I didn't think about droids not being like, are they not sentient that much in Star Wars, to be honest.
Why does C-3PO feel pain when he bumps his head all the time?
Well,
Maybe he's just programmed to emulate.
because you got to give him personality.
Right.
He's the one who talks.
Right.
It's the same reason that what is it? I don't watch Westworld, but I know one of the big complaints of this last season was one of the fights where it's like these guys are supposed to be androids and they're huffing and puffing, fighting each other. It's like, have you guys never seen Terminator?
Right.
You see them take a breath of energy once in the good movies? No, they're fucking
I haven't
robots.
seen the latest episode of Westworld, but in the second season, they were deliberately manipulating some of those androids of like, all right, going to turn aggression all the way up and like physical invulnerability and shit like that. It's like, you shouldn't be having physical limitations on these anymore.
Well, but isn't so I have not seen this, so you can judge me for that
I've
as
only
well.
seen
But
the
like
first
the
season.
entire idea of Westworld is that it's a theme park, right? Initially,
Well, then
I
shit
think- well,
goes
that was the
crazier.
movie.
well, yes, right. I get
Yeah,
it.
it's like
so that's
Jurassic
the very
Park with
first.
androids.
Exactly. So wouldn't you want the immersion of them being flesh and blood, even though they're androids?
And for the most part, they are. I mean, like when you want to go
yes,
into the
yeah.
theme world and mess with them, they feel like real people
Right,
because
during
that's what you
that.
want
But
to
once
do.
they leave the theme world and the later seasons, apparently they're like fighting each other in the streets over some sort of weird thing, and they're apparently just like huffing and puffing, like they're exerting effort.
Gotcha.
When
But
when
do they have access to their own programming, or are they just programmed?
I don't know. Again, I didn't watch it. All I know is from the people who did and liked the first season.
I mean,
It apparently went shit real quick.
because
so disappointing.
there's actually lots of
The
classic
first
sci-fi
season was
where
really good. I've only
them
seen that, but that was
breathing
good.
and perspiring wouldn't bother me at all because like I
Right,
watched
if it makes
Blade
sense in
Runner.
the story. But like
He
when
cried
when
in the
you-
rain, kids. He cried in the rain.
But the T-1000, and you see all the efforts he went through to turn himself into basically a Terminator to make sure that didn't happen. If
Right.
that's where you're going with it, if the whole point is, it's one thing when you're immersed in the story and you're like, okay, these guys are playing characters, they need to do that. But once it's past that and they're androids and they know it and they don't care and they're fighting each other, it's like, well, all right, they shouldn't do that. They're robots.
when they take control of their own programming, why have physical limitations?
Right. You think that's air you're breathing?
No, so
Yeah. Well,
new Terminators.
it's
terrible.
been an hour. All right.
Well, I thought
Do we
this
have a point?
podcast was
No.
gonna be like 2 hours, 4 hours.
Yeah, you're right.
We have-
I'll phone up the family. Late day at the office. It's going to be an 8-hour podcast, like
Yeah.
as Andreas said. So
I thought we were going Joe Rogan links here.
when we make Joe Rogan money, I will be happy to do an 8-hour podcast. So.
Yeah, so it's like if we have even any money, like I'll actually put more like time and effort, and I'll even learn how to fucking edit.
I'll watch all these shows so I can complain too.
Yes.
Aw, did we make
Sure.
too many pop culture references? So
Hey,
Wouldn't that be
someone
nice?
pays me money, I'll watch Avengers again. Sure, fucking whatever.
yes,
You shouldn't have
please,
to be
somebody,
paid to watch Avengers. You
For
it's
real.
even.
Somebody
I have
pay
seen
me to
them.
watch all the movies
If you
that I
pay
love.
me, I'll actually watch Rise of Skywalker. I could not do it.
Sure.
You can't pay me to watch that again. I don't care.
You
what-
watched it?
PG, how much for Solo? How much do I have to pay you to watch Solo?
Nope. I'm
I would watch Solo again for free. That was
I'm
Because
not
if you
doing
thought
it.
you were mad about some of these other movies, oh boy.
Yeah, I went
There's
from
no need
really
for me to torture
enjoying.
myself. I have the original trilogy and the prequels. I'm going to live in that world.
Do you have the handshot first version though?
I have it on VHS.
Awesome.
Mm.
Before we round off, I just want to ask because
Which
I
I
just
have
saw
to
it got,
adapt.
it
This
got
is what I've been
released.
rereading.
What is it? It can't.
Yeah,
Oh,
see?
Star Wars.
Right. When
What is
Obi-Wan's an apprentice and he's going
Yeah.
on adventures with Qui-Gon.
Read like
Good
one a day.
book. And they were young
so
adult novels.
They're
Yeah.
young adult novels. They're very simple, but they're entertaining.
I read some of those as well. Like I one of the things that I remember was him having like an actual sword duel and them talking about how like swords and lightsabers are not the same thing, you know. So,
Yes.
Yeah.
And there was a point where he temporarily leaves Qui-Gon because he becomes a freedom fighter because he tries to do the greater good
Yeah.
thing as opposed to the lawful
Qui-Gon
good
was
thing.
there for the
And they
mission.
explore these things, like good stories would for kids.
Is-
Look at
is
that, books for
where-
kids, and they still managed.
I actually thought Qui-Gon was kind of a great, a good kind of guy, which is one of the reasons why he didn't make it to the council.
Yeah, but he was lawful
Qui-Gon,
in
yeah.
the sense that he was more lawful than he was good, right? but everybody kind of knew that. And like, if you really want to be a nerd about it, you can follow the line down from Yoda and find out where all the Sith came from. Just saying, you know. So like, people weren't entirely sure that Qui-Gon wasn't on that path himself, you know, because Yoda taught what the hell was his name?
Dooku, right?
Dooku.
Yeah, well, yeah, but like wasn't he still called somebody else at that time, or did he go?
No, he was Dooku. His Darth name was Tyrannus. His name.
Yeah,
Yes,
why did he have
right.
Why did he
Because it's
Tyrannus versus Dooku? Like they never.
they all
used
get a
Darth
Sith
Tyrannus.
name.
Oh yeah, well they all get a Darth name. That's just
Yeah,
They
apparently
just
how it
call
goes.
him that.
Well, you also get the fact that he was masquerading as Sifo Dyas for like 20 years. So like that might have been the one where I was confused, where like he kind of like offed and took Sifo Dyas's place.
Well, he didn't know.
even though-
He offed him after the fact. So Sifo Dyas kind of like knew he saw what was going on.
right.
He goes to create this clone army. I think Tyrannus kills him. You know, Dooku kills him.
Mhm.
And then they just appropriated, like, so he and Sidious have this discussion where it's like, okay, so these clones are being made now, and they just appropriate them for his own plan.
Right.
Now we just need a war to use them in.
Right. Which
I mean, it's the better part of the Clone Wars, both the movies and everything else, is like seeing him play both sides and the manipulation, you know, that, you know, guess what? The Separatists are getting played just as much as the Republic, but everybody needs a pawn. And like, you get that especially out of the cartoons where like eventually, you know, guess what? Dooku doesn't make it. Like he's more or less the leader, and he thinks he's playing for Darth Sidious, but really he's being played by Darth Sidious. And, you know, anyway, we'll do another hour if you let me keep going. So
Save it for episode 2, I guess.
no, we got to do something non-Star Wars.
Okay.
Speaking of stars and space, just like I want to ask really quick. We don't have to discuss it. Who's gonna watch Space Force? Because it just
No
came out. I'm
Oh,
watching
come
it.
on. It's The Office in space. It's going to be hilarious.
I'm gonna check an episode at least and see if it's any good.
Well, yeah.
First of all.
But, so here's the thing about comedies. There are a lot of them that are pretty crap their first episode, let alone their first season, Andreas. So you got to watch past, you know.
That's a big time investment into something that's not good. Then
Not
if
necessarily.
it takes that
I mean,
long.
to
I don't
me,
get to watch every show the minute it comes out. So I just.
to me, The Office was fine. I didn't dislike it. There were plenty of enjoyable episodes for me. I do not revere it as the greatest comedy of all time, as many people seem to.
Such bravery.
So telling me it's The Office in space is not a selling point.
No, I mean, I was being joking. I've never seen an episode of The Office, so.
I did watch Avenue 5, which was the Hugh Laurie one. I found that amusing. And that's only like 6 episodes.
Bite size.
There we go. Is that our homework? We should watch that for next time. And we'll discuss.
We're assigning homework.
It's not, it was
Who says
fine.
homework?
It wasn't homework. It
rules?
was just, it was fine. It was
Just
short.
try to give.
simple.
We got to do something.
It was
otherwise
amusing.
It is going to be a Star Wars rant every time.
I'm
gonna get. I'm
right.
gonna cheaty. I'm gonna get the big board. I'm gonna start with a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, and we're gonna go from there. All right. So
Really, we're going to start 40,000 years in the past where it's the original, like,
no,
Jedi
that's
order?
a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. I just go in one long,
Well, what's one long? Is it the Old Republic? Is it the?
probably. Yeah.
Is it like 5,000 years ago? Is it
No.
Exar Kun? Is it?
Yeah,
is it-
long would probably be like KOTOR. And then like you get long. It starts to be like, so once upon a time we didn't have hyperdrive. Oh man, were those dark days. Like, but
And then we
still
did,
had
but we did,
lightsabers.
and then we did, but we didn't know where the fuck we were going. So we
Right.
just shot off into space and hoped we didn't explode. You know, you remember when that was a thing where we had to worry about that?
They called that 40K, so that's chaos and warp. No, yeah, I'll
okay,
take
no.
all of these together in one big.
Okay. Next time is Justin's interconnected canon dissertation.
Don't
gonna be
tease
sick
me,
that day.
because I will write this down. You know,
Alright, alright.
because we can
Hey,
talk
you were
about
the one
how
attempting to assign homework. You now have homework.
we could talk about how Terminator and Blade Runner are connected, and we can bring that into the Aliens universe and how Aliens begets Space Marines, and how like
Yeah.
I'm
Are
telling you,
aliens
there's
Tyranids?
a line.
Yeah, it's just, you need
Yeah,
Marines in space
like
to fight
Jet
aliens.
Killers?
That's what aliens was. Yeah.
Even though they don't know what they are initially.
You don't even.
Marines
know
in
the word
space fighting
says.
aliens. That's not aliens. That's
Did you Watch
Aliens.
It's literally
It's a cult.
Aliens.
Yeah,
Aliens.
It's the name of the movie.
I'm more. I really just I think about that other movie that's actually Marines fighting bugs. Like, wait, what's the name?
Starship
Starship
Troopers,
Troopers.
yeah.
Yeah, Starship
Which is
Troopers.
definitely in the 40K universe.
Yes. All right. Look forward to more. 2 weeks.
Yay.
Or ranting and rambling and God knows
And
what
an
else.
incoherent.